Yeah. It's on.
Yes? This is working?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Tom Markus.
Yes.
Tom Markus, who is the new, I guess I should say, city manager. He's been there since March. And we gave him as much time as we could almost with our schedule to get settled. We invited him to come and tell us.
Louder, please.
We invited him to come and tell us
That's better.
how the city is coming along under his leadership. And I get my glasses on so I can read this. Tom has previously served as city manager at Iowa City, Iowa, and several other places and other activities. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration, with a core curriculum in finance and urban regional studies from Minnesota State University, master's degree in public administration from Roosevelt University in Chicago, Illinois. He's an accredited manager for the International City Council Management Association and attended the program for senior executives in state and local government at Harvard. With over 40 years of municipal experience, Tom believes that public service is a calling and a choice to serve a community. Throughout his career, he's worked in the development of strategic plans, capital improvement programs, reorganization of municipal departments, capitalizing efficiency and accountability, oversight, and financial budget considerations, including economic development programs and the creation of development plans. There's a strong interest in social justice and growth issues between the urban core and suburban areas of communities. Markus and his wife, Deborah, are empty nesters with 3 growing children living in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Utah. He also has a family in Overland Park, Kansas, and he's getting well acquainted with us already.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. I walked around earlier and I handed out an update on affairs going on in the city, and there'll be extra copies for those that may have come in a little bit later, as well as my business card, and there's a number of ways to reach me through the business card. And I'd be glad to take your questions later on, and if you think of something after the presentation that you'd like to pursue a little bit further, I'll be glad to talk to you about those types of issues. So I have been here for about 7 months now, and one of the things that the City Commission, and we have a member of our City Commission here today, and he was going to sit back there quietly and not be recognized at all, but I'd like Stuart Boley to stand up. Stuart is one of your city commissioners. And we have someone else who's kind of shrinking down and not wishing to be identified, and that's Rochelle from the Lawrence Journal World. So be careful what you say, because whatever you say might show up in the newspaper. And so I've been here, like I said, 7 months. One of the things the City Commission asked me to do when I first started, I asked all the finalist candidates, was to come up with a 100-day plan of what they would do in the first 100 days. You may have heard this 100-day comment more recently in the presidential election. One of the candidates was talking about his first 100-day plan as well. Mine is completely different, I guess. But one of the things that kind of happened in the process was, when you get into a finalist kind of process and you're looking at a new opportunity to work at, you get a little competitive, right? So I started to really load up my 100-day plan about all the things I was going to do, and I wanted to shine in terms of standing out as a potential city manager for Lawrence. And so one of the things I said I was going to do is get around to all of our boards and commissions before I realized that we have like 40 to 50 boards. And I said I was going to get out and talk to all these different groups, and you have an infinite number of groups in this community to get out and talk to. And then I said I was going to do, to get out and do some listening posts. And you may have read, I got criticized because it wasn't the right format, it wasn't the right time, and it's always something. But we've done one listening post, and we're going to do another one, and that's likely to be at Haskell. We're trying to work out the arrangements to do that listening post and get around and talk to all the employees. We have 600 employees. And of course, your budget cycle is a little different than the budget cycle I just came off of in Iowa City. Iowa City's budget runs from July through June, so I had just finished the budget cycle for Iowa City and then got to do another budget as soon as I got here within the first couple months. And you remember there was a little bit of tension around that budget process. Remember all that?
Oh, yeah.
We had affordable housing issues, we had ped bike issues, we had arts and culture issues, we had public safety issues, we had all of those issues. One of the things that the City Commission had actually initiated through their staff before I got here was the requirement that we would do a capital improvements program. Okay? And apparently they used to do capital improvements program here a number of years ago, and then it got dropped. And I'm a big advocate for capital improvement programming, so the commission had asked the staff before I got here to try and infuse that into our budget process. And what a capital improvements program does is it takes the whole gamut of capital improvements. Now, capital improvement is usually a physical improvement, usually of a value of $75,000 to $100,000, and usually a lot more than that. And so what you do is you list all of these major capital improvements: streets, sewers, water, facilities like the city hall or a police department, or all those types of buildings. And so you list all of those things. And then, and quite frankly, some of the friction came about because then your city commission has to look at the city manager's recommendations about what to fund and what not to fund. And without a capital improvements program, it was whatever was being recommended, whatever was kind of popular at the moment. But that doesn't always make for the best decision making, in my opinion. You need to look at all of the needs, and you need to weigh them, and you need to prioritize them, and that's what a capital improvements program helps you do. The other thing, and I'm going to talk about this once I get into the slides a little bit, is prioritizing what the goals of this city are. And that's called strategic planning. And that's a very common process that occurs both in government and in the private sector as well. I used to refer to it as the roadmap as to where you're headed. Now I refer to it as the GPS. And so, like a GPS, when you're driving down a road, if there's an obstacle in front of you, the GPS comes on and gives you an alternate route, right? And so, strategic plans need to be flexible, but you really need to have kind of a guide as to where you're going. And so before I got here, the City Commission had listed a number of the goals that they had in mind, including affordable housing, and ped bike issues, and public safety, and finance, and economic development, and a number of those types of things. So that really helped me. The other thing the City Commission told me they wanted me to do was to come back with a budget that was balanced without a tax rate increase. And so I had done both of those things. And there were some things that were in the budget, what I usually refer to as being baked into the budget, that were already commitments. And there are a lot of things, like your own household budget, they're already baked into your budget, aren't they? So if you have a mortgage, you know, you don't get to just take the mortgage out of your budget for that particular year. That's something that's in there. And so, like that, we had a number of projects that we had committed to years before, and that's in there. And of course, the bulk of our budgets are personnel. That's the largest part. We're a service organization. So I came back, I realigned the budget based on the goals that the city had, and I realigned the budget so that it did not show a tax increase. And of course, what happens is then, you know, some of the expenses got moved over to affordable housing, some got moved away from other things like Arts Center and arts and culture, and it created this friction. Now, many of you might think that, well, that's not a good thing to have friction. Actually, I think it is a good thing to have friction, because friction really means that people are speaking to what they think are the priorities and their particular concerns. So I don't think friction's a bad thing, especially in the public sector. When everything is just going as smooth as it possibly could be, you should be really wondering about what's going on.
Right, right.
So what we did is we presented all of this, and the commission then immediately started getting lobbied and pigeonholed and talked to about things that they didn't think were budgeted enough or too much or not at all, right? And so that creates some of that friction. Well, I don't shy away from that friction. Like I said, I think that's a healthy part of a public process. And so I don't necessarily try to create friction, but I would tell you that if I'm doing my job, I'm telling elected officials what I really and truly think and what I think we can really and truly afford. And so I make those recommendations. In the council manager form of government, the manager is the one that's obligated to prepare the annual budget, not the city commission. The city commission, on the other hand, is the one that approves the budget. And so the commission took the budget that I recommended, made some changes, and finally adopted the budget, and there was what I would describe as a fairly modest tax increase related to that. I can tell you that tax increase was more modest than what the county's tax increase was or what the school district's tax increase was. But we all have our own processes in terms of governance, and we all have our own priorities, and we all make those decisions. And at the end of the day, all of us get to pay for those things, right? So engagement is an important part of the process, the public process. Engagement is an important part of helping to form the opinions that I end up having, and it's certainly that our city commission has. Well, the one thing that I think our budget did change up was that it did present a wider array of choices that our city commission has to make. And that makes budget processes a lot more difficult. The other thing I think our budget did was talk about context. And so choices create a better context, in my opinion. But one of the things I caution people about when we prepare budgets is the budget is approved. For example, now the budget we just approved, and you know, just since I've been here in the last 7 months, doesn't take effect until this January 1st. Okay, so that runs that whole cycle. And next, you know, late winter, spring, we'll be in the thick of the budget for the following fiscal year, which will start January 1st, 2018. And all of the interest in the community and all of those things will kind of come to bear again, and we'll go through that whole process all over again. And I probably will be a lot better informed about, you know, what's happening here in Lawrence and what the concerns of Lawrencians are as to how they want to see their government move forward. And hopefully we'll have enough time to complete our strategic plan, which will help inform the budget even better than the last budget was informed. Despite the fact that the City Commission had goals, they hadn't really gone through a formal procedure, but I give them a lot of credit for at least having established the goals that we started to work towards in terms of where we allocated resources. The other thing I'll tell you about any program that exists, the moment a city applies funding to a program, to a service, there's a constituency that is supportive of that particular service or program. And so what you end up doing is when you start shifting priorities and moving expenses around, you tend to confront some sort of support group, okay, around that particular expense. So nobody willingly, I don't think, goes into conflict, but budget processes by their nature, in my opinion, if done correctly, do have some conflict associated with them. And that's just part of it, and people have to understand that. Sometimes that's difficult for commissioners, because commissioners aren't used to that kind of thing, quite frankly, and where they come from normally in their own business world environment or wherever they were working previously. So that gets to be a challenge. So let me start going through the, if I can hit the right one here. So I talked a little bit about that first 100 days. And what we did is we talked about understanding the Lawrence culture and communicating, connecting with the publics here. And I've done a lot of that. This is my 4th talk in the last week and a half in different parts of the community. I've been pretty much around the community, and I'm also trying to get into a little bit more listening post kind of things too, and really trying to go to different groups in the community, a cross-section of the community, to get different opinions about what happens in the community. So we've been doing that, all with the design to get to strategic planning. And so our commission has recently given me authority to negotiate an agreement with a firm out of Cincinnati, Ohio. It's Novak and Associates. I would tell you, I think it's good that there's somebody that's not necessarily from here, because they have a different outside perspective. But I would tell you, on the other hand, most of the principals, in fact, all of the principals and many of the employees are Kansas University graduates. So they have the plus of being outside, and they have the plus of having gone to school here, and many having spent time here. So it's kind of a nice combination of people. Plus, I can tell you, between the city commissioners that sat on the evaluation and the city staff, we came to the conclusion unanimously about which one was the best firm. So, at the same time, when I started, we did what was called a SWOT analysis. And that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that gets done quite frequently in advance of a strategic plan, because one of the things you want to do is understand the environment of what you're working in when you do a strategic plan. So I went through that with all of the commissioners and with all of the staff, department heads. And you know, it was not a real in-depth one. It was kind of a way for me to start to connect with people on the city commission and the city staff and engage and find out what was on their minds. But that will be used as part of the environmental concerns in terms of the strategic plan. In terms of the strategic plan, quite frankly, we've got a lot of things that go on in the city and have been going on for a number of years. So we do, in terms of land planning and zoning, we do what's called the 2020, Horizon 2020 plan. I keep telling everybody that, you know, that's great in terms of the eyesight visual that you have with 2020, but the years are getting to the point where we need to adjust the years a little bit. So maybe our eyesight's going to blur a little bit in terms of the new title, but we need to get our distance out there a little bit. And so we do that, and we do that there. The fire department does its own strategic plan. The parks department does their own planning effort. They have a plan working as well. And so what the strategic plan tries to do is bring all of those different elements together and have more of a central kind of approach for the city itself as to where we're moving forward and how we're moving forward. And once we get the plan in place, like I said, it not only informs the budget and what's the priority of the budget, but I will use the strategic plan in all of the performance evaluations of our employees as well, so that we're all moving kind of in the same direction, consistent with what the goals of our city commission are. And that keeps us kind of moving in a fairly strategic path, and hopefully we don't get veered off. But the other thing we've done with our strategic plan is we've built in a revisit period on an every 2-year basis. And as soon as we're done approving the plan in March, we're going to revisit the plan this next November, a year from now. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to get the city commission in the cycle that as soon after they go through an election, if they change persons on the city commission, that the city commission takes a look at that strategic plan, we review it with them, and that the incumbents that are both moving on with us and the incumbents that are going off the city commission and what I refer to as the newbies all sit in the same room together and discuss that strategic plan, so that there is a continuum moving forward as to our kind of our long-range approach about what we're doing. And I think it also kind of creates a more civil kind of understanding that whether you were defeated in the election or you chose not to run again, that it's all about the public servants. It's all about our public. It's not about your particular tenure in the city commission or tenure as your city manager. It's what we're doing for the benefit of the whole. That's the whole purpose of why elected officials should be serving. That's the whole purpose why I serve. What are we doing for the whole community? How are we moving the whole community forward? So we get into that through the performance reviews. All of our employees, even if someone might think that they don't have any relationship to the strategic plan, they're part of an organization. I want them to understand what's in the plan. I want them to understand, what that means going forward for the community, so that they all understand that, they all get that. And so all these other plans then are really informing what will be in our strategic plan as well. There will be community impact or involvement in this, and we will also do some environmental scans, and I talked about some of the environmental issues that are local that have to be in the strategic plan. But then there's things that are almost global, right? So what's going to happen to transportation in 10 years? What's going to happen to transportation in 20 years? These devices that we all carry around and are looking at half the time when we could be communicating with each other face to face, okay, have been kind of just thrust upon us in the last 5 years. I call them the tethers, okay, because they never let you go. I mean, it's like 24/7. I wake up in the morning, I look, and I got a call from Stuart or an email from, Lisa, whatever. That's part of the routine.